All right. Well, welcome everybody to our basic deer hunting course. Welcome you guys. Sorry we had to have a little bit of a time change. We had some scheduling issues, but we figured better to go ahead and do it than have to potentially cancel or reschedule for a later date, because there's some pertinent information that we're going to go through here that you guys can use and access really soon, hopefully, here as we get this deer season kicked off. I want to introduce myself. I know it says Casey Harriet on my screen, but my name's Kelly Boyer. I'm filling in for Casey Harriet. She's on maternity leave. So I'm going to kind of be your host and aficionado of events today. So I'm also joined by Rick Nolan with the National Wild Turkey Federation. We're going to kind of tag team some information for you guys. And we're going to get right into it. Just want to do a few housekeeping deals. If you guys have any questions or anything during the presentation, please type them in the chat and I'll keep them jotted down. We'll address questions at the end. We'll go back through and then open up if you guys think of any at the end that you'd like to ask for any clarification or just any general questions. So again, my name's Kelly Boyer, and you see Rick on your screen there. That's Rick Nolan with the National Wild Turkey Federation, and we're going to get going. So thank you for being with us, Rick, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Kelly. Let me pop this PowerPoint up, and that'll help me, and maybe it's better for you guys to look at it than to look at me as we go through this. So I wanted to kind of cover 4 topics today, just to kind of give you a little heads up. So, the first one is selecting the right rifle for you, and then scent control, and a little bit about hunting the wind, and selecting a blind or a stand location within your capabilities as a hunter, and then close up with a talk a little bit about using deer calls. So just to start off with, the first thing you probably want to consider doing if you haven't already purchased a gun or obtained a gun is to think about what gun is right for you. And that's, if you ask 99 hunters, you're going to get 110 opinions of which is the best rifle to use. Probably the first consideration is, do you want a single shot or a bolt action or a pump or even a semi-auto? Probably a bolt action is the most popular for deer hunters. Second consideration is what caliber. And some of the things to consider is you as a shooter or whoever you're trying to outfit with the gun, are they sensitive to recoil? What's their experience level as a shooter? And even something a lot of people don't consider that I ran into with my grandson is sensitivity to the noise level that the gun makes, the report level. Think about those things. Also, you want to consider what your budget for ammo is, and the availability of ammo. A year or 2 ago, I would have never even thought about availability of ammo being an issue, but boy, it's turned into a big issue and concern in the last year or so. And then get a little more into details, the type of bullet, the bullet construction that's available out there, and then do you want to use that rifle for other game? Do you want to use it for just deer or maybe elk and antelope or bear or even moose later on? And then what expected range distance do you expect to shoot? Are you pretty much limited to 50 yards, or can you stretch that on out to even further? So as you take those things into consideration, let's kind of digest them one at a time. So this is kind of an interesting chart that I put together, and I don't want to get into the details too much. This is a recoil chart. It shows different rifles and the foot pounds of recoil that each one of those calibers will produce. So you can see here on the kind of the left-hand side of the spectrum, the 223s, the 22 250s, they have relatively low recoil. The downsides to those guns are they shoot a light bullet. The construction of the bullet, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, is kind of limited. They're generally a short range bullet, and shot placement becomes very, very important. And then kind of stepping up in the recoil level, you got the 243s, the 25-06s, you know, the 30-06s, the 708s. Those all have manageable recoil, and they have a little heavier bullet and a little better options for deer, you know, 100, 130 grain or so bullets. And there's pretty good bullet selection available. And, you know, the range varies, you know, from 100 yards out to a couple of 100 yards with these rounds. And then you get into some of the bigger guns, the 308s, the 30-06, the 300 Win Mags, etc. Those recoils on those guns can be problematic for some hunters. Bullets range from 150 to 220 grains. There's a lot of bullet options. The long distance range on these caliber guns is almost limitless, and they're good for most North American game. So if you wanted to look in the future to an elk gun, you probably want to think in terms of some of these bigger calibers. So those are some recoil considerations. And just to touch a bit on ballistics, and this chart has got a lot of numbers on it, and I'm going to try to move this out of my way where I can see. There we go. They've got a lot of numbers, and it gets confusing sometimes, but I just want to kind of run through this real quick to give you a quick overview as you consider the ballistics of a gun. So this chart shows all these guns were sighted in with 100-yard zero. And you can see the amount of inches that your bullet would drop out to 200 yards. And all of those are fairly, you know, 4 inches, 3 inches, all of them except that 30-30, which is going to drop way on down to about 6.5 inches. So that 30-30 would not necessarily be a good choice if you're going to have a 200-yard shot options. Any of the rest of them there are, you know, within a reasonable amount of drop from 100 out to 200 yards. What a lot of hunters don't consider is what's called wind drift or drift. So what this chart shows is if you had a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind, how much that bullet is going to drift with the wind at various ranges. So if you look at that, just that 223, for example, if it's sighted in at 100 yards and you got a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind, that bullet is going to hit about 1 inch downwind. That's not significant. In fact, none of these on this chart, the drift at 100 yards is real significant. But when you stretch it out to 200 yards, some of them start to be problematic. So that, just take that 223 as an example, and a lot of guys are hunting with those in their AR platforms. At 200 yards, that bullet's going to drop 4 inches, and a 10-mile-an-hour wind is going to move it off target about 4.5 inches. So when you couple that with a 2 or 3 inch group out to 200 yards, that really decreases your odds of hitting in the kill zone. Versus, for example, that 7mm 08 there in about the middle of the chart, it's only going to drift about 2.5 inches. So you see that how that wind drift becomes a factor. So when you look at this as a comparison, that 30-30 might make you a pretty good short range gun because when you start stretching that out for distance, you start really moving around on that target. Those two at the top, the 243 and the 223, those could be problematic if you get out to very long range, and that's because of the weight of the bullet. Those lightweight bullets just get pushed around by the wind. And I don't know if where you're hunting in Oklahoma, but boy, if you was hunting today, that 4 inch drift with a 10-mile-an-hour wind, I don't know what it would be with our 20 and 30-mile-an-hour winds that we're experiencing today, but it would be significant. So those would probably be good mid-range guns, and everything else on the chart would take you out to a couple of 100 yards. Hope that kind of makes sense and it's not too confusing, but it is one of those things that you really should consider when you're thinking about what caliber gun you want to go with. Bullet selection is what it all boils down to, because that bullet is what's meeting the game and taking care of business at range. So I wanted to just touch on those just a little bit. Again, it's not that big of a deal because the manufacturers have done a really good job of helping us with this. But the first, probably one of the most popular that's been used for decades is a lead jacketed bullet. Remington Core Lock and Winchester's PowerPoint are two examples of those. They've been around forever and they hold up really well, especially under deer-sized game. Moving up, one of my favorites is a partition type bullet, a nozzler partition bullet. You can see the construction of it there. It's got a copper jacket that separated the lead core with copper. It holds it together really well on game, and it's good for even up to elk size critters. And then there's a bonded core bullets. These things are really good for big game and long range. They hold together really well. And then the last one I've listed is a Barnes X type bullet. It's an all copper bullet, and these bullets retain up to about 95% of their weight when they hit a deer. So they're really good. So don't get too wrapped around the hub on that stuff. The manufacturers have done a good job of helping. If you'll pick up a box of your whatever caliber you're looking at the store, if it's got a picture of a deer on there, it's a pretty good bullet type to take care of business in the field. So those are some things that should be considered when you're buying ammo. And I'll also mention, when you buy a rifle, you know, you should buy the best scope that you can afford. It's not uncommon for guys to spend more money for their scope than they do their actual rifle. The scope could make or break your hunt, especially early and late in inclement weather. The size of the scope, 3x9x40, is a real popular size, and it's good for shots out to around 150 to 200 yards. If you're going to stretch out much further than that, you might want to think about a 4x12. And beyond 300 yards, you really need significant power to pull off a good shot. And I mentioned shooting sticks. I think that's one of the most important accessories that you can buy and carry in the woods with you, is a good set of shooting sticks. I will tell you from personal experience, the only deer that I ever remember missing with a rifle was because I left my shooting sticks in the truck that afternoon. And a good sling just makes carrying that rifle through the woods a lot easier and more comfortable. Range time, there is no substitution for range time. You pick up your rifle, they mount your scope for you perhaps at the store, and they'll bore sight it for you most times. But that bore sighting only gets you on the paper, so you got to spend some good quality time at the shooting range to get that rifle dialed in. I can't overstate the importance of getting that gun sighted in at your selected range. And if you can, use a bench rest when you're sighting it in. I know you won't be able to hunt with a bench rest, but you want to take all the misses out of that gun as you can and get it as consistently hitting that the target where you want to hit every time. And the best way to do that is with a bench rest. Sighting in distances, again, you can ask the 100 hunters and you'll get 50 different answers. A good rule of thumb is a 100 yards point of impact 0 for most hunting situations. If you plan on shooting longer ranges, you might want to think about sighting in at 200 yards. The rise and fall on that bullet between the muzzle and 200 yards is not going to be significant enough for most calibers to make a difference on killing a deer. Personally, I sight all my rifles in to shoot about 2 inches high at 100 yards. And I've never had an issue with killing anything because of that. And I'll tell you, you hear a lot of guys talk about shooting 250 yards, 300 yards. Those long range shots become very tricky. Most guns are capable of shooting, 1-inch groups or 2-inch groups at 100 yards. And those groups really start opening up when you get out past a couple of 100 yards to 300 or 400 yards. You know, for example, a 2-inch group at 100 yards is a 6-inch group at 300 yards. And you've only got about I guess about a 9-inch kill zone on a deer. So at 300 yards, you could very easily slip out of the kill zone and put that bullet where you don't want to. So keep that in mind, especially if you've got windy conditions. Don't forget that crosswind when you're thinking about taking those long range shots. And sometimes you can even experiment with winds at the range. And I've done that just to see what a 200-yard shot on a windy day will do to a small caliber gun. Practice time at the range is you just got to do it and shoot from different, take that gun out of that bench rest and put it on your shooting sticks, or as my grandson's doing there in the picture, he's put it on his bipod on the front of that gun. Shoot sitting down, shoot standing up, shoot laying down, however you think you're going to be shooting in the field. Make those practice shots and you'll see how well you can actually hit that target at downrange. So let's talk a little bit about a deer smell. That's their #1 defense. And I'll tell you that I'm of the opinion, and a lot of other people are, that you cannot beat the smell, the nose of one of those deer. So they use that nose nonstop. So when I'm hunting, the sense of that deer smell is my #1 concern. You can get by with a lot of things, but boy, you can hardly ever get by with letting your scent get downwind. Deer can smell, pick up your scent from about a half a mile away or maybe further, depending on conditions. And as you're walking through the woods, you're leaving a scent footprint everywhere you go. It's on the ground, it's on everything you touch, and it's in the air. You do everything you can to keep your scent from going down to where the deer are. And keep that in mind as you approach to and from your stand. Those deer may be downwind and smell you going into the stand, and they know you're there, and they may change their habits. You hear a lot of guys say that I had deer on my feeder every day till I got there, and then they disappeared. Well, I'll about guarantee it's because they smelt you going in. Always, when it's possible, always keep your scent blowing where the deer are not. And the only way to beat the scent war or to win the scent war is to hunt the wind. Keep that wind in mind all the time. And the wind is hardly ever constant. The wind is always swirling. I saw it a while ago when I went out to check the mail. The leaves in my front yard were mostly blowing out of the north, but some of them were swirling around, coming back from the south, and it's always moving. Thermals is another concern that a lot of people don't understand or think about. On a calm day or on any day, hot air rises and cool air falls. That's just the way it works. So if you're hunting on the side of a ridge and in the afternoon and that sun goes down, the air cools off, your scent's going to go down that hill. Same way in the morning. If you're in the bottom of that, in this case, in the bottom of that draw, and the sun starts warming up the air, your scent's going to go uphill. So keep that in mind as you pick your stand placement. And just think about, a lot of the commercial scent products are out there, scent-free soaps and sprays. They may help, but they also may hurt. And I say that kind of with tongue in cheek, but those deer, their sense of smell is incredible. And if you think you can mask your human scent, I'm not sure you can. So nothing really beats hunting the wind. So as we think about your blind or your stand location, keep in mind which way you expect the wind is going to blow. In Oklahoma, for the most part, the prevailing winds are out of the north or the south. So, and also keep those thermals in mind. Most of my locations that I have set up, I have a north wind stand and I have a south wind stand. so I can hunt those. And I may even approach those stands from a different direction, depending on where you think those deer are bedding and which way that wind's blowing. I've got a couple of stands set up right now. One of them I'm going to hunt in the morning that I don't really want to hunt it, but it's my best option for the kind of northwest wind I'm expecting in the morning. So you got to hunt the wind. If you don't, those deer will knock you off every time. And keep those thermals in mind too as you're picking a stand location. So you'd want to set your blinds based on your expected wind direction and where you think those deer may be bedding and feeding. So just keep that in mind as you start to think about where you're going to pick a location. And keep your maximum range in mind. If you think you're comfortable shooting a deer at 100 yards, I would suggest you set up where you think the deer are going to come within 100 yards. Doesn't do a whole lot of good to set up a spot that's 300 yards away making that shot. And the newer the hunter you are, the less experience you have shooting, you probably want to keep those ranges as short as possible. So stand location, look for draws, fingers, and what we call pinch points. And a draw, if you're from East Texas, you'd call it a holler. In different parts of the country, they call them different things, but basically it's a low spot between two higher spots, kind of that picture. If that picture is clear enough for you to see it, that's kind of a draw. So draws are good. Those deer like to travel those draws. Look for a draw or a pinch point that connects two tracks of cover or a transition between two types of cover. So in the picture on the right there, the middle one, that's kind of a classic funnel or a pinch point. So I hope you can see that, but it's a lot of wide open land at the top left of that picture. And you've got wooded area that kind of comes in and makes a pinch point or a funnel. Those deer traveling from one area to another are going to utilize that spot. So you'd want to set up in those type locations. And also that finger of land sticking out to the left there where that blue line is going out to the left in that middle picture. Those deer are going to travel down that corridor there as well. So you'd want to set up somewhere along there. And that bottom one is kind of a corner. You can see where it's got an open field to the bottom right of that. Those deer traveling through those woods are going to kind of pinch into that corner there. So that would be a kind of a good spot to set up. Elevation and wind direction, again, is important. Bucks looking for does will use that wind to their advantage as it funnels the does scent around. Keep that prevailing wind in mind as it relates to the direction that you anticipate those deer to be traveling from. Ridges and bedding area, above bedding areas. And by ridges, I don't necessarily mean what you'd think is a true ridge. In this case, a ridge can be a creek bank, a hillside, or even a hilltop. Anywhere that the deer might use that terrain and that wind to maximize their ability to smell. And again, don't forget those thermals if you're hunting those ridges. Early in the morning, early and late in the afternoon, that wind's going to change direction on you, or at least your scent will travel differently in that wind. A final thought about stand placement. You don't necessarily have to have a tree stand, a box blind, or even a pop-up. Hunt off the ground. Find you a good spot with some good back cover. And just have a seat. You don't have to have all that fancy stuff. I like to hunt off the ground with a turkey vest when I'm rifle hunting. Turkey vest has got a fold-out cushion, or just take an old piece of carpet with you and throw it down on the ground. I've killed some of the biggest bucks I've ever killed in my life from sitting on the ground. I just find a good spot to be comfortable with the wind to your face and let it happen. Just camo up and get in front of a big brush pile, or a big tree, or something behind you to kind of break up your outline. And don't forget your shooting sticks. Brings back nightmares still, but we can talk about that one another day. I wanted to talk a little bit about using deer calls. A lot of calls on the market. I make custom deer calls. That's one of my calls there in the picture. But sometimes a deer call will get you in trouble because bucks will become very wary of calls. Even though a well-executed deer call can work, if a buck hears the perfect rattling sequence or perfect grunt, he may come investigate what's going on, or he may not. There's no guarantees with those calls. So I'd like to talk for just a few minutes about 5 different calls to consider. A fawn bleat. Fawn bleat kind of is what a fawn would use to signal that he's in danger, he's lost or hungry, or he just wants his mama around. And a fawn bleat will attract does, even if they don't have a fawn. And those bleats will sometimes attract bucks just out of curiosity. And sometimes they'll attract bucks because mom is around. If you can bring that doe in to check out her fawn or check where her fawn's at, then it might just bring in a buck as well. And then the doe bleat. Does actually make a lot of noises, including grunts. It's kind of a whiny noise and it lasts a few seconds. Does use those to communicate with each other, kind of like cows, only not nearly as loud and not nearly as often. An estrus call might signal a buck that she's ready to mate. And the estrus call can be used in the pre-rut as well. As they come in 2 primary styles. Of course, a tube type grunt call can be used to make that noise. Probably the most popular that you've seen around is the can calls that you just turn them over and they make that doe bleat sound. And then a buck grunt call, which is probably the most popular. They're good pre-rut. It's kind of a drawn out low grunt that lets the bucks know that they're the most dominant buck out there and then they're willing to fight. While they're chasing a doe, this is one of the cooler sounds that I've heard a deer make, is when they're chasing a doe, an estrus doe, the buck will use a series of tending grunts. It's kind of a short grunt, 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 grunt as he's chasing that doe around. It's kind of a neat experience. If you have a balanced age structure in your herd, there may be a few mature bucks that will respond to grunting. Just a word of caution though, a deer grunt may run off some of the smaller, less dominant bucks because some of them are just not willing to fight, or they've already tangled with a bigger buck and they've said they've had enough of that. So when they hear that noise, they're gonna make a quick exit. And then a snort wheeze call. Snort wheeze to the deer just says it's time to fight, let's get it on. Snort wheeze is produced by when they rapidly exhale noise through their air through their nostrils. And one of 2 things will happen when you use a snort wheeze. That mature buck who thinks he's the king of the mountain, he's going to come in or he's going to run, one or the other. Snort wheeze is best used when they're actively fighting, and if you see that type of activity going on, then you might try a snort wheeze. But you should really only use it around mature bucks because the young ones, they probably already had enough of that so far this year, and they're not necessarily willing to tangle anymore. So they'll tend to avoid the area. And then rattling horns. I've already seen and heard quite a few deer this year kind of sparring around. They're just kind of pushing each other around and haven't really started fighting yet. Although I have seen some that's got some broke off horn tips already, so they may be already doing it. So they'll be lightly sparring, and that gets more aggressive as the season progresses. If you're gonna rattle, you might want to start out rattling real lightly. You don't want to spook any bedded deer that's close to you, and then you can turn up the volume as you progress through it. use a snort, wheeze, and grunts together. When you're rattling, sometimes works. If you have material bucks in your area, make sure that whatever rattling system you use, that you're using them at the right time and don't overdo it. Kind of some general calling strategies. The general rule for me is if don't overdo it. Most hunters, I think, make way too many calls. You sit in the woods all day long and you've had a good day if you've heard a deer grunt or bleat, or if you've heard some rattling. So don't overdo it. Those deer don't run around all day long making noises. And before you call, look around pretty good to make sure that there's not any deer that slipped in on you and started bedding up, because once you start rattling, you need to, if you've already seen a deer somewhere, real close for their reaction. I've seen them turn and walk towards me, and I've seen them turn and walk away from me when I started rattling or making grunt calls. So just watch what they're doing. Kind of let them deer tell you what their expectations are. And if you don't see any deer, start calling softly and then work up in volume as you go. If you're calling more than every half hour or so, you're making way too much noise. I suggest a lot less calling than even a half hour. Most of the time, especially up during the day, those deer are where they're at. They're not moving around always a whole lot. So just keep that in mind. Don't make too much noise, and start soft and turn the volume up as you go. A good thing to remember is especially with a mature buck, when you start rattling or calling, if he's going to come in, they will very often come in downwind. They will circle a long ways out of the way to come in downwind, because they know exactly where that call come from, and they'll circle to come in downwind. And keep in mind that less is always more. A lot of guys will try blind calling, just don't see a deer, hadn't seen a deer, and they're just going to call to see what happens, to see if there's any around. Again, far too often they'll come in downwind and they'll bust you, and you never know you got busted. If that deer doesn't see or smell another deer that they've heard grunt or rattle, they may just come in downwind and leave. And you never know you got busted. And deer are fast learners. So if you're calling in your area too much, they're going to figure that out real quick, and they're going to avoid those calls. The only time that I ever blind call is maybe a half hour before I'm going to get down out of a stand, and I'm fixing to bust everything that's around me out of there anyway. When I get down, I may give it a few calls or a rattle just to see what happens in case I get lucky. And that's all I've got, Kelly, and I'd like to thank y'all for the opportunity to share. And just a few final thoughts is never say always when you're talking about deer. Deer don't always do anything. They are the most unpredictable, predictable animal I've ever tried to chase. Remain flexible in your hunting style and what you do. Learn from every outing. Most important is have fun and be safe. Kelly, back to you.
All righty. Well, thank you, Rick. My portion of this is I'm gonna go ahead and share a PowerPoint as well. I'm gonna talk more about license requirements we have from the department, and a few resources that you can reach out on your own once you've been successful in your hunt. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see it?
Yes, sir.
All right. So again, I'm just going to cover some basics about what we're looking for, and we're going to start right in with your license requirements. as an Oklahoma resident, we do have license requirements. If you're taking or you are a youth hunter, if you're younger than 16, you're exempt from having the hunting license. If you're 16 or 17 years old, we have a resident youth license that is at a reduced cost, but it's only available for 16 and 17-year-olds. And then we have our just annual hunting license that is required to participate in the hunting season. And we also offer a lifetime hunting license that can also be purchased. And there's other licenses out there. That's just a highlight of our most common ones. Now, you'll see deer licenses on there. Those are commonly referred to as your tags. We call them deer licenses because they are licenses that you're purchasing. They're not necessarily tags. The tags that we offer are for deer season are antlered and antlerless licenses. We have youth deer license, and they're only available for youths under 18 years old, and they are a reduced cost. And another thing I want to bring up about the deer licenses or the tag is you must have a license for every animal you intend to harvest. So you need a buck tag for a buck you're going to harvest and the method that you're going to harvest. Since we're talking about gun season, we can only harvest one buck during deer gun season, but you'll need a tag or a deer license for every doe that you intend to harvest as well. And that's the antlerless. And we call it antlerless because sometimes there's some mistakes that happen and some deer are harvested with less than 3 inches of antler above their natural hairline. And those are considered antlerless deer. Again, we want to stick to the statewide bag limit, especially going into gun season. If we've been out muzzleloader hunting already or archery hunting already, those other seasons count towards your statewide bag limit for deer, which is 6, being no more than 2 antlered bucks. For non-residents, we have non-resident deer, and then I use quotations for it's whatever method that you're hunting with. Archery has their own permit, muzzleloader has their own permit, and rifle has their own permit. Now, each one of those comes with the number of deer licenses or tags that are associated with that season. So for the rifle season, you would get all of your doe tags and your hunting license for that one cost for non-residents. Now, for non-resident youth, they must have these same licenses. We don't offer a youth license for non-residents. The license that they would have to purchase is the exact same license as if they were an adult. And also, again, the statewide bag limit applies not only for the entire season, but for each method that you hunt with. We have a hunter orange or a safety orange requirement while a firearm season is in. Right now we're in muzzleloader season, so these are required right now. But when we get to rifle season, the law is 400 square inches of day flow orange. Now it says day flow orange, but it can also be the camouflage orange. But it has to be a head covering and a garment above the waist that is at least or exceeds 400 square inches. Now, I've never seen a game warden out there with a tape measure measuring square inches, but just to know that you need a body covering above the waist and a head covering when you're out participating in one of the firearms season. If you intend to bow hunt during one of the firearm seasons, you're exempt from having to wear the body covering, but you must have a head covering that is day flow orange as well. So if you are looking at hunting public land, it's really important in that preparation process that you consult the regulations, whether online or one of the booklets, and look at the WMA or the public hunting area that you intend to hunt. They're listed under the special area regulations portion in our regulations book. go to your WMA that you're hunting and make sure that it's open for your dates that you are planning on coming to hunt. Many of our WMAs shut down for certain days for controlled hunts. Some of our WMAs are simply just not open to rifle hunting or certain activities during the time you may be planning. So make sure you go to our regulations and check your specific area that you're going or planning on hunting to make sure that they're open. Another valuable piece of information that you can find here, again, when you plan your hunt, is a hunting contact number. That's typically the biologist that's on the site. They'd be happy to talk with you and answer any of your questions about seasons or what they have going on their WMAs. They're not hunting guides, so they're not going to be able to go, well, if you go down this road, take a right, sit under this tree, you're going to shoot a deer. They manage the property, so they know fairly well about what's going on their property. But it's an important and a key piece of information that you can access if you plan to hunt any public hunting. Another form of public hunting areas that we have now are our OLAP properties. That's our Oklahoma Land Access Program. There's a map on our website, wildlifedepartment.com. If you'll go to where to hunt, there's an interactive map on there that has all of our OLAP properties listed. If you're looking on OLAP and you see this little logo up here on the left, that'll tell you that's a hunting property. If you'll zoom in a little closer on that property, you'll be able to see the borders, and each one of them are named with a county that they are located in and a designated number. And if you hover on or click that name of the OLAP property, you'll get this little message that comes up that gives you more information. What methods is it open to? What dates and seasons are it open to? What kind of access they have? What species are you allowed to hunt there? And sometimes there's notes about what the type of cover is there so that you can plan your hunt. Now, also, each one of these, if you'll go back and look at this middle map, they'll have a P. These are places where people want you to park on their properties. These are private landowners that have partnered with us to give you access to hunt their properties. So we want to follow their requirements of access and how they want their land treated. And we want to try to be respectful of that. I chose this property too because you'll see this little icon. It's kind of hard to see because it's really small, but there's an exclamation point. That means that there's an additional special request from the landowner. Make sure you access those and follow those as well. But OLAP is becoming more and more popular, and there's more and more properties out there. So definitely look into OLAP, and that's just a quick kind of tutorial on how to find out information if you're planning to hunt OLAP properties in Oklahoma. So this is a big deal. Okay, we've shot a deer. There's something we called a field tag. Okay, a field tag is you're putting your information on the animal you harvested after you harvest it. This has to be done before you remove the animal from the field, from where you've recovered it at. You can use pre-made tags. I've used Band-Aids in the past. I've kind of gone into using duct tape because duct tape works very, very well on the leg of a white-tailed deer. What you're required to put on there is your name, your customer ID, the date of harvest, and the time of harvest. I usually write this out on a roll of duct tape with a Sharpie. I'll tear it off and I'll wrap it right around that deer's leg, and it usually doesn't ever try to come off until I remove it from the deer. Now, this tag must remain with the carcass until it reaches its final destination. The term final destination is where it's going to be processed and consumed at. So if this animal's going to a processor or anything like that, it needs to remain with it until you pick that animal up and it's at its final destination. After that, after we've put the field tag on, we can go ahead and we can check in our harvest. So now we have two methods of checking in your harvest because we have an e-check system now. One of them is using our mobile app from your mobile device. You'll simply pull it up on your interface, punch your account in, you'll hit mobile e-check. It'll ask for your information, and then it'll ask you about your harvest questions. And once you're done, it will give you a confirmation number. If you'll look where it's 1, 2, 3, you can check to see if you've successfully checked it in. If you think you might have missed a step, if you're not sure if it's been checked in, you can click on again that mobile e-check. You can search your history, and it should come up there with your confirmation number. Now, what I do is I'll go ahead. I use the mobile app to check in the deer. I'll hit the mobile app. I'll answer all the questions, and at the end, when you hit submit, it gives you a confirmation number. I'll go ahead and take a screenshot of that confirmation, and then I have a digital record right there with my license on my cell phone. Well, not everybody's got cell phones. Not everybody's got cell phone coverage. So we also have e-check available through our Go Outdoors Oklahoma website, which is our licensing website. Again, once you get computer access, you'll put in your information to log into your account. You'll hit e-check or harvest report. It'll be the middle picture as you access it from Go Outdoors Oklahoma. There's different check-in forms. There's deer, turkey, elk, paddlefish, everything that you would need to check in. Just click on that report button, and it will begin to ask you the questions about your harvest, when it was harvested, what county it was harvested in, time, is it an adult, is it a buck, how many points, so on and so forth when you check in your deer. At the end of it, you will hit submit, and it will give you a confirmation number. This confirmation number is the number that you're going to need to take to a processor. Go ahead and print out this confirmation or jot down that number. Any processor that you take your deer to, or taxidermist if you take a deer to, they're going to require that this animal be checked in prior to them taking it. So as again, a rule of thumb for me, I'm going to put as much information on that animal as I can when I'm leaving it somewhere. I'm going to have my field tag still with the deer, and I'm going to have my check-in confirmation. When you're taking it to a processor or a deer, it has not met its final destination yet. So you're supposed to leave that field tag on it until it reaches its final destination. So say I'm fairly new to this, and I have harvested a deer and I want to find a processor. On our website, wildlifedepartment.com, under the hunting tab, we have a list of game processors in Oklahoma that have we've reached out. They said that they're processing game. There's the county that they're in, the name of the processor, their address, the city they're located in, and a phone number. I highly, highly, highly encourage you that if you feel like you're going to go on a hunt as part of your preparation stage, reach out to that processor, make sure that they are indeed processing deer. And then once you do harvest a deer, you can make arrangements to drop your deer off with them. If you're feeling ambitious and you want to try to process your own, which I do process all my own deer now, again, on the same website, where you access your processor, there's a tab on there of how to process, where we've provided a couple of videos, tutorials on how to process your own game if you want to give it your own try. Again, another experience that I highly recommend if you've ever tried doing it. Maybe involve somebody with some experience so that they can teach you and help you along the process. But this is a resource you can access where we've provided really good tutorials on how to do it yourself. So that's really basically all I've got. Right now, I'll open it up. If anybody in the meeting has any questions, we've got a few minutes for questions. So if you want, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, and ask any questions. You can ask them in chat, however you want. We're here to answer any questions for you guys that you might have. So. And I certainly hope this was helpful to you all, and you may use any of this information. Nobody.
Well, thank you for your time and your knowledge. I certainly, Rick, your president, learned about calls and that, and it's good to see you, and Kelly.
Good to see you, Gwen. Well, I'm not getting any, so we'll thank you guys for attending. We'll have some other classes that you can sign up for. Again, I apologize on the time change on this. We just had to kind of make a call real quick. And yes, Rick.
Kelly, Mr. Bonner asked a question. He asked it of me privately, but we were kind of chatting back and forth, so I'm not sure he realized he was asking it privately. But his question is where would you take a newbie who's never been out before?
You know, that's a really good question. I take a lot of first-time hunters out. I try to get them into areas where they're going to see lots of, or at least some game. It's very entertaining to new people to be able to see what they're out there to hunt. Now, you know, it's hunting, so that doesn't always happen. And especially if it's in the case that it's a kid, try to keep them entertained. I know there's a big disconnect about not letting them have electronics or anything. If the kid wants to get up, he gets bored, you're not seeing anything, don't force them into it. If they're ready to go, pack up and they're ready to go. At least they experienced it for a little bit. But I would try to make it as successful as I possibly could, do some pre-scouting, take new people out to areas where they're going to get the most successful opportunity right offhand that they're going, you know, that you're able to provide. Not all of us have places where we can take people out and see 20 deer a night. Some of us do. And I actually am thankful that I have a piece of property that we pretty much always see deer when we go. And it's really entertaining for people to go, even if they don't harvest a deer for the first time. If they're out there seeing what they're out there for, or seeing things happen in nature, that helps a lot in engaging people for the first time. And if they go again and again and again, eventually it'll happen for them, and it'll be an experience they never forget.
Yeah, Kelly, one of the hardest lessons for me to learn with taking somebody new was to keep in mind that it's their hunt, not mine. And I get pretty hard-headed sometimes, and I'll sit a lot longer than maybe I should. But when that new hunter gets tired, you know, no matter if it's a kid or an adult, they get tired, they get bored, they want to go. It's their hunt, so yield that to them so they'll want to go back the next time.
All right, I got a little clarification on Bonner's question here. They just moved to Oklahoma and they're new to hunting. We have a lot of public lands, and I don't know where you're around, but on our website we have quite a few public lands we have a map of public lands that you can access. You're around El Reno. Okay, so there's I would tend to try to gravitate out west to some of the farther west WMAs. They're generally really large, even up at our new Sand Hills WMA. I'm familiar with that area because that's around the area that I hunt, around Cleo Springs. There's a lot of deer in these places. You just really need to spend the time in trying to figure out where the deer are, where the deer are going to be. As you head out west as well, there's a lot of those OLAP properties that I was talking about earlier. Again, they're private lands that they've let access to the public. But again, those can be really good opportunities to access deer hunting if you're new to the area or trying to figure out. Another thing that I'm really highly recommend doing is try to reach out to people of common interest. Try to find some hunting buddies. They're really good about, you know, I typically like to think we Oklahomans are fairly friendly. Sometimes we get a little bit stingy with our deer hunting, but some of my best friends I've ever known throughout my life are built in bonds around hunting. And a lot of them have taken me on opportunities that I've never been able to have. And I've taken some of them on opportunities that they've never been able to have. So finding those people of common interest that might could help you along, maybe mentor, maybe take you with them to get your foot in the door. I also highly recommend, just knocking on some doors, introduce yourself to some landowners, try to gain access, foster those relationships with landowners, state your intent, and you never know. All they can really say is no. But if you're interested in doing it, these it's kind of the ways you got to go. You got to ask before you can go. And I know a lot of landowners really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to come and ask instead of just doing and trespassing and doing it wrong. They like things being done the right way. So yeah, just don't be afraid to knock on those doors and just tell them your story, tell them what you're about, and maybe you'll have some success.
Kelly, can I add to that a really good way to get to know people that are in the hunting community is through aligning yourself with a conservation organization. Of course, I'm very involved with the National Wild Turkey Federation, but there's others out there. Quail Forever, Pheasants Forever, and some of those. But and I found that if you get involved with some of those organizations and you associate with hunters, then it becomes a lot easier for those guys to kind of help you along in finding a place to hunt. And if I can also just suggest, there's a lot of outfitters out in Western Oklahoma that has some fairly reasonable doe hunts from a cost perspective. Reach out to some of those guys. It may cost you a few $100, but you know what? I hunt a private lease in Texas, and I spend more than a few $100 a year hunting that private lease. And sometimes I think I'd be better off I just went and hired an outfitter and let him do all the work and me show up for 3 or 4 days and hunt his property. So that's another good option. It comes with a price tag, but it's a good option to get you in the field.
That's a great point. And joining like the NWTF or DU or something like that, there's always some commonality in people there, and always people that love the outdoors, and a lot of people, I would think, like me, that love to share the outdoors as well. See the value in it, see the value in getting new people into it. So that's definitely a great door to open. Great suggestion. Thank you, Rick. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up now. We're at that time. So thank you again all, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you again, Rick.
Thanks, everybody.